Five Nights at Freddy's is one of the most modded horror franchises in history, and almost nobody talks about why. From cracking open AI values that were never meant to go past 20, to rebuilding entire games from scratch in new engines, modders have torn this series apart in ways Scott Cawthon never imagined. So today I'm breaking down every major FNAF mod and what makes them tick, starting with the one that started it all, FNAF 1 Custom Night Max AI Deluxe Mod. Here's the thing about the 2020 challenge. Everyone treats it like the ceiling, the absolute maximum, but it's not. It's just a number on a slider that Scott decided to cap at 20. The engine itself doesn't care. It'll take whatever you give it. Modders decompiled the GameMaker bytecode, found the hard-coded maximum checks, and just removed them. Suddenly you could set Freddy to 50, Bonnie to 99, Foxy to 100. At values that high, the animatronics attempt state transitions so frequently that your reaction window approaches 0. You're not playing a horror game anymore, you're playing a reflex test measured in frames, which is, you know, not ideal. But the AI values were just the beginning. Faster power drain, shortened Foxy charge intervals, removal of brief safe states, rage meters that escalate behavior over time. These extreme values expose edge cases the original game never anticipated. Animatronics overlap in ways the state machine wasn't designed for. Door logic desyncs with jump scare triggers. More importantly, these mods demystified the entire series. Once players understood that AI 20 was just a number, not some hard engine limitation, the obvious question became, what else can be pushed? That single realization made every FNAF mod that came after possible. But if cracking open the AI was the first step, wait until you hear what happened when modders decided FNAF needed to be multiplayer. Fine, the FNAF multiplayer mod. Here's the thing about Five Nights at Freddy's. It was built in GameMaker, a single-player, single-threaded, no networking whatsoever GameMaker project. And some people looked at that and said, yeah, I'm gonna bolt multiplayer onto this, which is, you know, completely reasonable behavior. The engineering problem alone is absurd. You need to serialize door states, camera feeds, animatronic positions, power levels, and timer values into synchronized network messages between machines that were never supposed to talk to each other. If the guard's client thinks a door is shut while the animatronic player's client thinks it's open, someone's getting a jump scare they didn't earn or missing one they deserved. Some mods run host authoritative models, others split authority, letting the animatronic player own movement while the guard owns power and doors. A few interpolate positions to mask latency, building netcode from scratch for a game that actively resists having netcode. Normal hobby stuff, but the real shift isn't technical, it's psychological. When a human controls Bonnie, suddenly the animatronic can faint. It can bait a door close to drain your power. It can wait. The AI in vanilla FNAF follows probability tables. A person follows grudges. Some mods give animatronic players cooldown limited teleports and distraction abilities. Guards get rebalanced with extra audio cues. Add proximity chat, and now someone is whispering, "I'm right outside," through your left speaker while you're checking the right hall camera. The loneliness was always the point of FNAF. Multiplayer replaces mechanical unpredictability with social unpredictability. And honestly, a friend laughing while they corner you is scarier than any algorithm. These mods proved FNAF works as an asymmetric horror platform, and later, fan games built entire multiplayer experiences around that exact template. But if you think human-controlled animatronics push the game to its limits, wait until you see what modders did to Ultimate Custom Night's endurance formula. Ultimate Custom Night endless modes and content expansions. Ultimate Custom Night was already a massive love letter to challenge players, packing dozens of animatronics into one brutal configurable nightmare. But modders turned it into a living platform, pushing beyond Scott Cawthon's original 6 AM mercy rule. Endless modes work by diving into UCN's internal code to find the clock variables and timers that end the night at 6 AM, then disabling or looping them. Instead of a fixed night length, players face waves of animatronics with no set endpoint, survival stretching indefinitely until failure. Sometimes victory conditions get flipped entirely. Survive a set number of waves or hit a score threshold rather than just marking time. Content expansions approach UCN's modular character system like plugins. Each animatronic is basically a behavior script with input listeners and UI elements, so modders add entirely new characters with original mechanics. That can mean secondary currencies, alternate power meters, or mini challenges nested inside the main UI. Some fan-made foes force players to develop entirely new strategies or juggling tricks. Balancing all these new animatronics isn't easy. UCN already walks a razor's edge between manageable chaos and overwhelming overload. Adding more characters risks breaking the challenge or making making it just a mess, which led modders to create curated challenge presets carefully chosen to test skill without becoming impossible. This gave rise to marathon streams and endurance events, where players push mechanical skill and psychological stamina for hours. The removal of the 6 AM escape hits right at UCN's lore too. This isn't just a game, it feels like eternal punishment you can never escape from. These mods validated the idea of FNAF challenge modes as endlessly extensible modular systems. Many fan developers have since created custom night engines with swappable character modules, inspired directly by how far UCN was taken. If you think Ultimate Custom Night is terrifying enough on its own, wait until you see the eerie world of FNAF VR textures and restored unused assets, discarded designs. Here's the thing about modding a VR game. You swap a texture in a flat 2D title and maybe the lighting looks slightly off. You swap a texture in VR and suddenly Freddy's face is 6 inches from yours, looking like something that crawled out of a development build that was never meant to ship. The margin between slightly different and deeply unsettling basically doesn't exist when a headset is strapped to your skull. The process starts with extracting Help Wanted's packaged asset archives using community tools, then hunting through UV maps and material instance references to locate specific texture. Modders build replacements that carefully match original resolution, color channels, and compression, because VR performance will collapse if you get that wrong. Some upscale normal maps for sharper detail, others darken eye sockets and layer grime across metal plating, pushing animatronics deeper into uncanny valley territory. Both work because VR amplifies everything, but the real gold is unused asset restorations. Like most large projects, Help Wanted shipped with development leftovers buried in its files. Alternative character models with different proportions, test rooms, early props. Modders scan the archives, identify what's dormant, then patch maps to spawn these assets in accessible locations or re-enable disabled event triggers. The result is something between finished game and development museum. You can step inside discarded design directions and examine animatronics that almost existed. Different color schemes, altered proportions, material finishes that suggest weeks of internal debate. Lore theorists treat every unused model like evidence for alternate timelines, though developers caution against reading cut content as canon. But when you're standing in VR close enough to inspect the seams of something that was never supposed to exist, it stops mattering whether it's official. In a franchise about hidden truths, surfacing buried artifacts is its own kind of horror. Speaking of surfacing problems, wait until you see what modders had to do just to make Security Breach run properly. Security Breach mods. Security Breach launched and immediately asked your GPU to do things it had no business doing. The Pizzaplex is massive, visually dense, and about as optimized as a shopping cart with a flat tire. For a lot of players, the game wasn't just rough around the edges, it was unplayable. Sub 20 frames in open areas, texture popping so bad that Glamrock Freddy loaded in looking like a purple smudge, and loading times long enough to contemplate your life choices. So the community did what the community always does. They fixed it themselves. The first wave of optimization mods targeted texture resolution and VRAM streaming. Modders created downscaled texture packs that reduced memory usage without turning the Pizzaplex into a watercolor painting. The sweet spot sits somewhere around having native resolution on distant surfaces while keeping character textures mostly intact. Beyond textures, modders went after draw distance, LOD thresholds, dynamic light counts, and shadow resolution. In plain terms, they told the game to stop rendering stuff you can't see. The open atrium areas went from slideshow to playable almost overnight. Disabling motion blur, depth of field, and heavy bloom didn't just improve frame rate, it improved clarity. You could actually see Roxy coming instead of squinting through a cinematic fog filter while dying at 15 frames per second. Here's the thing nobody wants to say out loud: same AI, same maps, same scripting. But at 60 frames per second with clear visuals, Security Breach feels like a completely different game. The chases are tense instead of frustrating. The stealth sections are readable instead of guesswork. So much of a game's perceived quality lives in performance rather than core mechanics, and Security Breach is the proof. For many players, these mods aren't preference, they're accessibility. The community essentially patched a launch they felt was incomplete, turning an experience that locked out half its audience into something everyone could enjoy. But if optimization mods let you play Security Breach properly, wait until you see what debug tools let you do to its DLC digital archaeology. Most horror games don't want you looking behind the curtain. Ruin practically dares you to, and modders took that dare literally. Boundary break mods for the Ruin DLC work by intercepting the functions that clamp your position and camera to authorized region. Disable those collision flags, and suddenly you can move through walls, floors, and ceilings like the geometry is a suggestion rather than a rule. The decayed Pizzaplex stops being a haunted maze and becomes a construction site you can float through at will. But the debug mods are where it gets genuinely fascinating. Here's the thing about Security Breach's shipped build. It still has internal diagnostic tools compiled in, just hidden from normal users. Debug mods re-enable those overlays, and once active, you're looking at command consoles showing object names, collision boundaries, trigger zones, AI states, and performance stats layered on top of the actual environment. It's like putting on X-ray glasses in a haunted house and seeing every wire, every speaker, every trapdoor mechanism at once. Surfacing those triggers reveals how enemy spawns, cutscene starts, and story flag advances are networked together. You can watch the DLC's narrative machinery operate in real time. This animatronic spawns because you crossed that invisible line. That door locks because a flag flipped 3 rooms ago. Ruin stops being a game and becomes a living diagram of its own construction. Speedrunners use these tools for route discovery. Seeing collision meshes and trigger boxes identifies potential skips, clip points, and nav mesh manipulation that would take hundreds of hours to find through trial and error. Official runs forbid debug mods, but every major routing breakthrough starts with these overlays active, and thematically, it's almost too perfect. FNAF has always been about looking behind the curtain, discovering hidden rooms, peeling back corporate facades. Literally moving beyond boundaries and peering behind stage-like sets echoes every narrative arc about secret tapes and cover-ups. Ruin's already crumbling environment makes it feel less like cheating and more like the natural next step. But if boundary breaking turns one game into an open textbook, wait until you see what happens when modders throw the textbook out entirely and rebuild the engine from scratch. Open source recreations. Here's where modding stops being modding and starts being game development, because at some point a group of community developers looked at FNAF 1, 2, and 3 and said, I'm not going to edit this game. I'm going to rebuild it from nothing. And then they did, from scratch, in Unity, Unreal, Godot, whatever they had access to. Full re-implementations of camera switching logic, office controls, power management, and animatronic AI written as proper state machines and behavior trees. The dedication is genuinely insane. Some projects aim for near-perfect fidelity, matching original timing windows down to the frame, replicating movement probabilities, and intentionally recreating minor bugs from the source material because removing them would make it feel wrong. The original game had a quirk. That quirk is now a feature. But here's where it gets interesting. Other developers treat that fidelity as a starting point, then blow past it. Difficulty sliders beyond what Scott ever intended. New animatronics slotted in cleanly. Adjustable randomization parameters. Because unlike hacking a compiled GameMaker binary, they built the architecture themselves. Want to add a new character? Drop in a config file. No touching core code required. Some even support multiplayer or full scripting APIs. And because many release under permissive open source licenses, they create something bigger than themselves. Shared libraries of FNAF-specific logic that other fan developers just pull from. One team's implementation of Foxy's sprint behavior becomes another team's starting point for an original fan game. Over time, this forms an unofficial technical canon for how FNAF-style mechanics should be structured, but the real impact isn't aesthetic, it's developmental. These engines transform passive players into active engineers. They ensure FNAF-style gameplay persists in new forms regardless of whether the original executables even run on future operating systems. Preservation, education, and creative expansion all packaged into public repositories. If you think rebuilding existing FNAF games from scratch is ambitious, wait until you see what happens when someone drops these animatronics into a completely different genre. The FNAF Doom mod. Here's a question nobody asked, but everyone needed answered. What happens when you give the night guard a shotgun? Turns out, catharsis. Pure, unfiltered catharsis. The FNAF Doom mod and its free roam cousins represent something philosophically interesting in the modding space. For years, the entire identity of Five Nights at Freddy's was built on powerlessness. You sit in a chair, you watch cameras, you close doors, you die, that's it. You never fight back, you never even stand up. Then some modders said, what if you could? And rebuilt the entire pizzeria inside GZ Doom. The process is wilder than it sounds. Modders take GZ Doom's level editor and manually reconstruct Freddy Fazbear's pizza tile by tile, importing recreated textures, those familiar checkered floors, the stage curtains, the unsettling posters. Animatronics get scripted as monster actors that patrol corridors and charge on sight. Bonnie rounds a corner and eats buckshot. Foxy sprints down the West Hall and meets a plasma rifle. It's beautiful and deeply, deeply wrong. But here's where it gets interesting. The shooter conversions aren't even the most ambitious ones. Free roam stealth conversions keep the original FNAF mechanics intact, but replace static cameras with full 3D navigation. The AI responds to sound and line of sight. The camera system becomes a handheld device you physically carry. Survival depends on hiding behind behind kitchen counters and holding your breath while Chica shuffles past 3 feet away. Modders have to build entire nav meshes, tune AI perception ranges, manage lighting and occlusion, all inside engines that were never designed for slow, quiet horror. The technical requirements are absurd. You're essentially asking a corridor shooter engine to be a stealth game, but the results prove something important. The core fear of being hunted by uncanny mascots doesn't need static cameras to work. It doesn't need powerlessness. It doesn't even need the same genre. Freddy is terrifying whether you're watching him on a grainy monitor or strafing past him at 60 miles per hour in a pizza parlor turned kill zone. And Doom speedrunners applying strafe running techniques to escape Foxy. That's content that writes itself. But if fighting back against animatronics feels empowering, the next category flips it even further. Because some people don't want a shotgun. They want to be completely untouchable. God Mode and Developer Menu Trainer mods. God Mode and Developer Menu Trainer mods are some of the oldest yet most transformational tools in the FNAF modding world. Unlike traditional mods that alter game files, these trainers attach externally to a running FNAF process, scanning memory to find critical variables like power levels, death flags, AI aggression, and night timers. They then freeze or override these values in real time, bending the game's logic without touching its core code. Here's where it gets interesting. God Mode flips the whole premise of FNAF on its head by preventing death registration altogether. It intercepts the function calls that trigger jump scares or instantly resets the death flag, and any related state changes back to pre-death values. The player becomes effectively invincible, able to witness every frightful animatronic approach without consequences. Developer menu trainers go even deeper, surfacing hidden QA tools buried in the game's code but never meant to be player-facing. With a few hotkeys, you can toggle night skipping, teleport between cameras, spawn animatronics at will, or pull up diagnostic readouts that display AI states and event triggers. These features are the electronic skeleton keys to the game's innermost workings. Technically, these mods are engine agnostic since they operate on game memory rather than modifying files directly, but that means they have to be updated regularly as patches change address offsets and function signatures. Still, their external nature makes them incredibly versatile, usable across multiple FNAF titles regardless of underlying engine differences. Philosophically, God Mode and Developer menus completely invert the series' central power dynamic. FNAF is built on player vulnerability, uncertainty, and limited control. Trainers grant a godlike omniscience that exposes every timer, attack pattern, and internal rule, turning terrifying chaos into explicit manipulable code. It's a radical transformation. What starts as tweaking AI numbers or power drains slowly builds toward transcending the very rules that create fear. The player's journey from terrified survivor to omniscient observer mirrors the community's own evolution over a decade, from passive consumers of horror to active co-creators reshaping the Freddyverse on their turn. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.